Hello and welcome to my 25th CPD Coffee Time session. Hopefully this will be useful today as I'm going to focus primarily on the ways in which we can promote well-being and help children and young people and the adults supporting them to manage anxiety during online learning, which is clearly ongoing as we continue to navigate our way through this current COVID pandemic. So my key aims for this session are to initially identify some of the more effective ways that we can promote positive online learning for our children, and to clarify some strategies which ensure this sense of connection and safety, which they clearly also need at this current time. And also thinking about how we can increase readiness for learning by reducing the heightened emotional states and ensure access to the kinds of routines and rituals that children need in order to be able to thrive in this context. Also ensuring the 3 A's are all addressed, those 3 A's being anxiety, accessibility and attunement, and hopefully identify some ways for you to really ensure a sense of community and connection, which ensures well-being for the whole of the school community at this time. I'm going to reflect very briefly then on some specific top tips around supporting transition back post-lockdown, which hopefully will begin to happen possibly around the middle of March or after the Easter holidays for some. And then think about how we can help children to develop their own individualised anxiety support plans in order to continue to effectively get through this current situation. During the first lockdown last year, in March, it was Adrian Bethune, the wonderful Adrian Bethune, who identified the challenge for schools in terms of actually ensuring that they could really maintain positive relationships and ensure children's well-being is developed when they're not physically in the school building. So it's really, really tricky that the whole premise of being in school, connecting to people, knowing that your teachers are there, that they care for you, they want to nurture you and teach you and love you, has been kind of pulled away. The rug's been pulled away from many children in this particular area. And I think it's really, really very difficult for teachers as well, in particular, not being able to continually on a daily basis check in and see their children, young people every day, so that they can pick up those early warning signs when something is going wrong or there is a potential problem. So in his really, really wonderful article, Adrian Bethune highlighted those chats in the corridor that really teachers those moments that matter to them significantly in terms of engaging with their children and their young people. And it's really, really hard as well for those young people themselves when they're away from those daily interactions that they get in school. And very often something that could just be a little problem, quite easy to solve with a quick chat with my form tutor, suddenly escalates and I begin to catastrophize because it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and the snowball effect happens simply because I did not have that initial conversation with someone who cared for me and could help. And that very small interaction can make all the difference, as we know. So I think there's really no doubt here that keeping this sense of connection and community is really harder when we are engaging virtually. And also just thinking, this is a wee bit of fun, obviously, this cartoon, but just thinking about what online school classes actually look like for our children and young people. And I think for many of our younger children, there are significant issues around the level of play and the level of socialisation that they are currently missing, and the fact that many of them are being required to be online, to attend to a computer screen for many hours during the school day, which definitely would not normally be the case. And also for secondary schools, you know, in terms of safeguarding protocols, etc., etc., just maintaining those connections can be very, very difficult. And some of the issues that have been raised as well around children and young people, finding live lessons really, really quite difficult. Just getting organised in the sense of opening up the files ready, ensuring that everything is there so they've got it available to discuss in the session. This kind of level of multitasking can be very hard for some of our students, particularly those who've got additional needs. And sometimes when students can't be seen, teachers really have no way of knowing if everyone's ready. So the usual kind of body language, the eye contact, just those small gestures that we might make are missing. And this can lead to highly sort of pressurized and anxiety levels rising, but pressurized context, learning context. And also some students feel incredibly self-conscious when they contribute live and they can't actually see other people's faces. That can be unnerving. So these are some direct quotes from students surveyed. The things that they said they were actually worried about currently, and one of them saying, I'm worried about people seeing my bedroom, making comments about it. So again, this kind of social comparison on social media, particularly. One of the students said, I don't like not seeing the teacher. I want them to be visible. I want to be able to make eye contact, even though, albeit it is virtually. I don't want to speak when I can't see people in case they laugh at me. It all goes too fast for me. Our broadband is not good. This has come up again and again in terms of children accessing online. I get behind, I get panicky. I miss seeing my friends. It reinforces the fact that I can't see them when I'm online. And I can't be with them physically. I get stressed about downloading all the resources. I couldn't upload my work. So again, a technical issue. And then this one, very, very key. And isn't it interesting, sadly, that it's mum again, not dad, the primary carer here. My mum is too stressed to help me. She's trying to do her own job and her own work. And actually, I'm worried about asking her for help and support. So how do I feel about lockdown 3? This is a 17-year-old studying for her A-levels. And she's felt really, really stressed because she's worried clearly about how the lockdown might impact on her grades and starting university, whether she'll have exams cancelled, which of course now we know they're going to be, that, but we may get some kind of assessment, a smaller exam now, we're being told. But she feels like she's in some kind of loophole and worried also about how this lockdown is affecting others and how they'll cope. She said it makes her sad not to be able to see her friends in person. And this comes up again and again with young people currently. They get their lessons through Microsoft Teams online, and she said actually we're all expected to upload our work at the end of the lesson. As evidence of work and learning. And she says, I enjoy these online lessons actually because she feels that she's more focused and productive as there are limited distractions. Now that's very interesting. That's a positive here. And I think it is important that what we don't do is over pathologize all our children. They are seeing so much in the media at the moment about catch up and about how they're all falling behind. They're all going to have mental health difficulties. And this is really tricky. We need to move away and shift away from this over pathologizing, because for some of our kids this experience would have been very good and very beneficial. For others there will have been an increase in anxiety, but it's very, very important that we're aware of this continuum of experience. Okay, Jodie here found it much more difficult to actually speak out in class because she was online, so it's a positive. However, what she did feel was missing was this lack of emotional support. So despite the school saying, they're talking about mental health a great deal very often, they've given the children, the young people, 10-minute breaks through the day between lessons in order to help us to move around or get a drink. But she feels in a way this is tokenistic because actually, although that prevents them from sitting at a screen for hours on end with no breaks, what it doesn't do is actually really address some of the concerns they have, give them the opportunity to offload, to problem solve, to share their concerns and worries together with people who can effectively support and nurture them. The Education Endowment Foundation, EEF, identified what key things practitioners needed to consider when implementing strategies to support remote learning. And they talked about teaching quality being more important than how lessons are delivered, which of course we all know. Ensuring that access to technology is an essential, and we know this as well, and we can see from those children who've not had this access how their levels of anxiety have increased. Also, peer interactions can provide motivation and improve learning outcomes, so again, need to be factored into the lesson planning. These lessons also can support pupils to work more independently and improve their learning outcomes, so there are significant positives that can arise from online learning. But it's essential always, as we would in terms of supporting children within the real life context of the classroom, we need to differentiate effectively because different approaches to remote learning suit different types of content and pupils. Before I reflect a wee bit more on what actually does work and what best practice would look like, in my view, I just want to flag up this body health quick reminder here. We are all sitting down more at this current time. We are all engaging in a lot more computer activity, dare I say it, social media, many of us. But we're sitting, and we're usually sitting incorrectly. Our posture's not good, and this can lead to much far longer consequences in terms of well-being and physical well-being in particular. So we need to really check our posture and ensure that we're actually sitting or standing or moving in the right way. So just to flag that up. And my really key point here is when I talked about differentiation in particular, but I'm also talking about connections, safety and nurture here. And any approach to online or remote learning that's successful will be one that really focuses first on the people rather than the technology. And we know for many of our schools, COVID-19 presents a clear sign that business as usual is no longer an option. We're having to be much more blended. We're having to be much more effective in terms of differentiating our approaches and giving children much more flexibility as to how they will learn. And I think to some extent, this is going to be ongoing for many, many months, perhaps years to come. And there is an awful lot that we can probably learn from children's experiences of online learning, and for some, how well it's worked for them in terms of actually thinking about going forwards, how we're going to educate them. And I think school leaders at this time really need to be thinking about applying their knowledge of their own context, but not be afraid to take some really bold decisions about how they migrate to cloud systems, think differently about future provision for their children and young people. What's really worked well is what we need to focus on and think about how we can extend that going forwards. So one of the key factors in terms of children saying they've felt more anxious during online learning has been this lack of connectedness, this sense that they don't belong together as a group, as a community anymore. So I'm going to take you through 8 top tips as to how we can build a sense of belonging in a remote learning environment. So the first tip is around having regular class check-ins, absolutely essential. Introducing daily form time, which you would have usually, you'd have normally with our children and young people. So logging on together at the same time each day to check in, to say hello, how are you doing, how are things going, how's everyone feeling, what are you looking forward to today, etc., etc. One lovely teacher decided to introduce quote of the day at the start of these sessions every single day. So just thinking about what someone might contribute here, and this was her idea, and I think it's really super, sharing at the start of the teaching day in order to boost that sense of connection. Another year 10 form tutor decided to share thought for the day. So again, general connection, group thinking, sharing ideas, and then getting all the students to also share a thought for the day. Online assemblies, again, bringing that sense of the school community coming together as it normally would. Really important to continue with these as far as we possibly can, in my view, sharing achievements, again, giving out certificates and reminding the young people that they are there still as part of something bigger than themselves. They're part of that school community. And also ensuring that there is the availability to children and young people of having those one-to-one catch-ups. So many of them may need that little phone call at the end of the day or during the afternoon session when the children are engaged in something more practical. It's really frequently the case that some of our more vulnerable children can go unnoticed in these whole class check-ins. So very, very important. And children and young people value this immensely, that focused attention. And dare I say it, making online school time fun. We learn when we're happier. We learn when we're not hypervigilant. We learn when we feel regulated. We learn when we feel connected and nurtured. And I think it's really, really important that laughter and fun do not suddenly become something that's a bit of a mystery to our children and young people. It's really, really important. So bringing that laughter into our online engagement is absolutely essential. I would actually just share joke of the day. And tip 5, introducing these extracurricular challenges, opportunities for the children and young people to collaborate and be creative through extracurricular challenges. Again, very, very important. And of course, ensuring accessibility, tip 6. Children who don't have appropriate devices to fully access their learning and school engagement will feel isolated. We know this, and there are obviously we will be, as teachers, ensuring that they have access to the resources in paper format. These will be delivered to the home, etc., etc. However, it's really, really important we communicate with parents to understand the devices that are being used at home and identify students who may need hardware to really ensure that they can fully engage. And sadly, I know from personal experience here where I live in Kent that there are some children who still do not have access to the appropriate hardware, so it is an issue. And of course the staff matter significantly here. They're the ones that are delivering this. They're recording or pre-recording sessions, they're delivering sessions live, etc. Hopefully it'll be a combination of the two and they won't be asked to be live every day for so many hours a day. I think we need to be very realistic about what is feasible and what kind of levels of stress can be managed here. But teachers need to know that they've got a skilled tech team behind them and they've got the right kind of support should they need it. This should not be adding to their levels of stress currently. So very, very important they have the right kind of support technically. And also I think this is a really, really key one. Many of our teachers who are teaching abroad, expatriate staff, many of our teachers who are teaching remotely themselves need to have access to the appropriate level of counselling stroke supervision. Really, really important that the leaders in schools take time to talk with the staff and ensure that they've got the kind of expertise they need in order to engage with wellbeing support. It needs to be made available. This is absolutely essential at this time because if we've got teachers who are attempting to navigate this whole arena of online learning and produce the best work that they possibly can in terms of supporting the children, we need to recognise the levels of stress that they are under in order to be able to do that effectively 5 days a week. And I think it's really essential that the wellbeing agenda does not get passed over now for this agenda of catch up. So let's move on to recognising and supporting anxiety due to social isolation stemming from lockdown and the whole COVID pandemic. So to start, the key point I want to make is that for all of us, adults and children involved in online learning, learning remotely, or learning in a more blended way, we know that we can all focus on what we can control and not on what we cannot control. And this is an absolute essential. I'm being asked on countless occasions at the moment to support families, children, young people in terms of managing their anxiety. Many of their worries and concerns are around their schoolwork and their lack of social connection, but also they're very, very concerned about getting ill when they return to school, some of them. And I think it's really about flagging up the realities, the myths around all of this and ensuring that children have the opportunity to regularly focus on the things that they can control. Okay, so their own behaviours in terms of keeping safe, the way in which they interact with others with kindness, their routines, exercise routines, their ability to ask for help and staying in touch and looking after themselves generally, both emotionally and physically. All of this is within our control for all of us to some extent. So I think it's very, very important that we really support children and the adults involved in supporting them in focusing on the things that we can control and ensuring that we do that as effectively as we possibly can. And it's also clearly vital at this time that we are very aware of how anxiety presents itself in many, many different ways. For some of our children, it will be around difficulties in sleeping or feeling that they need to control things. They will feel more agitated or angry. It may result in apparent defiance or other challenging behaviours. However, very, very important, we recognise anxiety very often presents as defiance or challenging behaviour simply because a child feels totally overwhelmed. And you know yourself when you're anxious, you're worried, you're slightly stressed about something, you sound more clipped, you sound more aggressive sometimes. We all do. We also find it harder to focus, to attend to things. We don't have that level of cognitive control. We actually have a level of cognitive overload and we need support to be able to effectively manage this, to plan effectively, to slow down and take things small step by small step. So very, very important that we think about how anxiety presents itself in so many different ways. But all of us can reduce our levels of anxieties. And there are really 8 specific keys I want to just present here to you. The first one is by providing structure and routine. This makes us feel safe, it makes us feel secure. And I think particularly at this time, when there are heightened levels of anxiety for many of us, that we really stick to routines, we timetable things in effectively so that we know what's coming, so that, again, we feel a certain level of autonomy and control. We also need to ensure a balance between exercise, play, and free time for our children and young people, and for ourselves as well. Very, very, very important. And that we have some quality time together, which isn't primarily focused on achieving learning or doing something that is cognitively demanding. We need to just have fun. It's been snowing this week down the east coast of England where I live, and I've just seen so many children outside playing, building snowmen, etc. And I'm thinking this is what they should be doing. They need to be out, and parents need to give themselves permission to do this as well. Very, very important. We play together, quality time. Also limiting access to the news. I only watch it once a day, very briefly, and just take in the headlines. I think we can get overloaded. And again, this reinforces what we can't control, how long the COVID pandemic lasts, how many variants will come into the UK, etc., etc. So very, very important. Spending time focusing on positives, again, those 3 good things at the end of the day, 3 kind acts that I can do tomorrow, 3 things that went well, 3 things I'm grateful for, etc. So very important. Maintaining relationships as well, so just taking that time to have a little phone call or WhatsApp video call with friends, with relatives, with people that we know love and nurture us. And looking after ourselves is clearly an essential. And I've been saying this a lot around this. It's a bit hackneyed, self-care. But I think it's really, really vital that we look after ourselves first if we're going to be able to help our children manage their anxiety. Our own anxiety has to be managed. We have to be self-regulated first. So very important we do look after ourselves. So if we notice that our child is being or feeling anxious, we've got to listen, empathise and validate. We mustn't dismiss it. The worry might seem quite small for us, or it might seem irrational, but actually saying that or dismissing the emotion or the worry or the concern is really, really counterproductive. Think about being an emotion coach, and please make reference back to my CPD session on emotional literacy and emotional coaching, because that gives you a very good basic understanding as to how to be an emotion coach, which is all around listening, empathizing. I can see you're feeling worried. I can see that you're really hurting here, and validating that it's normal. I would feel like that if I was in your situation, etc. Helping them to label their emotions, to normalize them. I'm not dismissing them. And then, of course, teaching them those essential breathing techniques, 5-finger breathing, mindfulness strategies, helping them to challenge those negative automatic thoughts that they experience so regularly, and understanding that those thoughts are not always a reality. The way we think about things, our thinking is not always a fact. Okay, what I think is not always a fact. So again, teaching them, supporting them to engage in thought challenging. So I'll talk about that in a wee bit more depth in a minute. So some of those essential breathing exercises, and again, these are all in a toolbox for wellbeing, which has become the bestseller for Hinton Publishers. I'm really glad to say, written in the first lockdown. So everything that I'm going to present now in terms of strategies, you will find in that little book. Ball breathing, holding a ball in your right hand, inhaling as you squeeze the ball and exhaling as you relax your hold. Straw breathing, so placing a straw in your mouth and inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the straw. The birthday cake, so imagining that there is a birthday cake, breathing in before you blow out the candles and breathing out when you blow them out. Hand breathing, so as I said earlier, tracing your fingers one at a time, counting 5 as you breathe in, and then again as you breathe out, as you trace around your thumb and then each of your 4 fingers in turn. So very, very simple things, which are very easy to teach, particularly to younger children. Okay, very important. And again, apart from grounding our feet into the floor, which we can do very, very easily without people even noticing, we can also ground ourselves by actually focusing our attention and taking notice of 5 things we can see, 4 we can feel, 3 that we can hear, 2 we can smell, and 1 thing that we may possibly be able to taste at that given point in time. So it's just focusing away from the worries, the concerns, and the anxiety, and to really just simply grounding ourselves. And we need to do this regularly during the day, whether or not we're in or out of the school context. If we're at home and we're learning virtually, this is more important than ever to take those moments. So when my year A-level student is saying she has the 10 minutes to actually get up, make a cup of tea, go to the loo, etc. between lessons, we've also been advising our young people to actually engage in grounding, mindfulness, deep breathing. And again, progressive muscle relaxation, which is also from the toolbox of wellbeing. There are so many good tapes, CDs and apps available on relaxation now, which you can download onto the child's mobile phone. Really, really useful. But it needs to be practiced. You get better as you practice. It's like anything else. It's a set of skills. And I really do believe that although we can do this sitting down, it's really, really useful to get particularly some of our younger children to actually lie down and really have a go at alternating between those states of muscle tension and relaxation, moving up from their bodies or down from their heads to their toes. And again, I talked about challenging our negative automatic thinking. Really, really important. Test your thought activity, again from the toolbox of wellbeing. So identifying that negative automatic thought, oh, I'm going to get this all wrong, I'm not going to be able to upload my work, or everyone is going to think I'm silly in this session, they'll be making faces at me and I won't see them do it, etc. What's the evidence for it? What's the evidence against it? I very often get children to write those down in 2 columns. Then what would your best friend say about your thought, this thought that you have? And what would you say to your best friend if he or she had this thought? And we know that most children love giving advice. So this is the point at which I think the cognitive shift can take place, because children will say, oh, yes, I would tell my best friend they shouldn't think this because actually they're quite good at that, or it doesn't matter what other people think because actually they don't care that much, etc., etc. So what we would then be doing is saying, well, how true do you think this thought is now that you've actually written down what you would say to your best friend? And also, let's take another step here. What would you say to your best friend if he or she had this thought? Now, you've actually articulated that, so now think about how you could use that yourself. Could you write this down on a little memory card or a post-it? Could this be something that you could slip away, print and pocket out and put it in your pocket, so next time you have that negative thought, which is not a fact, you can actually read through what advice you need to be giving to yourself, the same advice you'd probably give to your best friend. So just to flag up and just reinforce, the 3 R's are what actually reduce the anxiety levels. The routines, the checking in, the quality time with peers, those sessions to understand yourself better in terms of relaxing and grounding yourself, the routines around taking out the dog for a walk, doing something special at the end of the day, looking at 3 good things that have happened to me at the end of the day, planning 3 kind acts for the next day, etc. Routines, vitally important, knowing what my timetable is, having the right resources, being prepared ahead of time, and then the rituals and the rules that make me feel secure, the things that I do throughout the day that ensure my level of well-being remains consistent. David Rock and Dan Siegel actually produced this Healthy Mind Platter, which I also think is very useful to factor into our thinking when we're working with children and talking about how to manage anxiety. We all need what they call a healthy daily platter, and this includes adequate sleep time, physical time, the focus time on the work that we're doing, time to connect with others, time to play, an absolute essential. Children at this current time have an awful lot of play and socialisation to catch up on. And when they've done that, I think we'll find that much of the so-called learning that they apparently have missed will also, almost by osmosis, dare I say it, they'll begin to catch up more effectively and learn more quickly. Downtime, doing nothing, chilling out, that kind of rest that very often we tend to feel guilty about. Oh, I was just reading my book, I was just staring at the telly and getting involved in a story. very, very important that we do that. But also time in with ourselves and time in with those that love us. And those routines can include the routine of having that timetable, the initial linking at the start of the day, magic moments throughout the day that we make happen, that we plan in, flow activities, our painting, our creativity, our drawing, our singing, our music, our football, whatever it is, we need to factor those into our daily routines, playing games, reducing the screen time by engaging in art and creativity, physical activity, time to talk, showing and telling, dare I say it. Sounds old-fashioned now, but very, very important. Time just to chill. Very important that these are routines on a daily basis in order to actually ensure that we keep our kids mentally, emotionally, physically well. A lovely daily schedule produced from Learning and Wellbeing Psychology. If you don't follow them on Twitter, then please do. 3 wonderful young psychologists who've got together and I think are developing some very, very exciting work and really, really relevant to today's children and young people. And the way in which they're supporting parents is also really something that I think is to be applauded. So daily scheduling, what's this whole thing about waking up, getting ready, getting washed, doing your teeth, dressed, etc., etc. Keeping the routines similar to the school day is what that allows us to do. Getting things prepared, making sure the resources are there, engaging in those structured learning activities. But I think splitting those very, very much into smaller chunks, and particularly for our younger children, for the under sixes, really, really important that they are not expected to do or engage in more than 15 to 20 minute sessions at a time. Creativity, creative learning, the actual routines and rituals of lunchtime when we engage in those social skills, learning and play activities, circle time, end of the school day. So again, if you look at this, very much punctuated with a very clear routine and activities that reinforce what would normally be going on in the classroom. And to get away from that screen and to ensure that we actually do fun stuff, it's really, really important. There is so much out there and so much available in terms of off-screen time that we can download and use with our children and young people. Loads and loads of wonderful, wonderful art activities in particular. And I think it's really, really important, those art challenges, creative challenges, that we can help children set themselves on a daily basis so that it's not all about online learning. And again, the rituals stroke routines, having those mindful moments during the day, engaging in self-soothing activities, things that help us to calm, using our calm box if that's what we need to have available to us, the grounding, visualization, but even those rituals of tidying up, snack times, comfort breaks, chill out, connect times, really, really important. I just want to reinforce it. So online learning, in terms of actually ensuring that our children remain well and cope effectively, we need to address anxiety levels for all, and that includes the staff and the parents, because we will all be experiencing different levels of anxiety. Accessibility for all, and then attunement. I'm going to talk through each in turn. So again, I made reference to using emotion coaching, recognizing a child's anxiety, helping them to label it and helping them to process it, and validating it with them and helping them to problem solve. When we're thinking about how we talk to our child who's anxious, we've got to be really sure that we help them to feel safe and protected and nurtured. So letting them know that we're here for them, they're safe with us in our presence. Do they want to do some dancing or running to get rid of that worried energy? What can we do physically together? Let's talk about it. What would you like to say to your worry? What might your worry say back? Then what might happen? Let's draw it. Let's draw that worry out. What does it feel like in your body? So understanding the physiology of anxiety. How big is it? Where is it? Now you match your breathing to mine. And again, this is about sharing, co-regulation, sharing my self-regulated self with you. So holding hands together, I'm going to show you how to use this grounding, how to use some deep breathing, how to begin to use that 5-finger breathing so that we can do this together. Let's actually match each other here. And I think about what could happen, some endings for what could happen next, very, very anxious ones, goofy ones, really realistic ones that are really quite off the wall. And what's something that we could do together to help you feel better? So really, really important. None of this is about dismissing those worries. None of it is around saying that's not important, it's not true. Okay, we must never, ever do that. These little worries will escalate if they're not dealt with effectively at the outset. And I also think for all of our children, young people, I would suggest a pupil passport for children going into high school for, the transition from year 6 to 7, particularly those with additional needs. I do actually think now that all of our children need to actually develop and work on their own personal anxiety support plan. They may call it my worry plan. They may call it something about, my well-being plan, my plan to ensure that I keep my head right. Whatever you call it, I'm calling it here an anxiety support plan. And this is really about what works for them. And this is very, very important as well. We can all learn a different range of self-help strategies. We can learn self-regulation strategies. But it might work better for you than it would work for me, one particular strategy. So, for example, mindfulness might work very well for some children. It might particularly not work so well for those with ASD. So I think it's really, really important. It's about what works for you, person specific, not for anyone else. And also, when you're kind of thinking about what works for you and what you think you need in your planning, you're jotting down, brainstorming, thought storming ideas, you have to remember as well that there are no right or wrong answers. So if something works, you write it down, even if it feels a bit odd or strange or weird. And also, I think it's important to support children in being as specific as possible when you're noting down these ideas. Because if you are specific when or why or what you would do and how you would use it, it's more likely you will follow your plan. It'll be easier to follow your plan when those anxious feelings seem to be taking over you, they're overwhelming you. And also it's about flexibility. So like any plan to support us in terms of managing, for example, self-harm behaviours, or any plan in terms of managing stress or anxiety, we will need to be flexible and adapt it over time, because we will change and our context, the learning and social context, will also change. So it's about kind of adding in new ideas, reflecting on the ones that maybe didn't work so well, trying to find out why that was the case, maybe tweaking them and doing it slightly differently next time. It's all about flexibility. So a basic structure for my anxiety support plan might be initially identifying what my triggers are. When am I feeling anxious? Is it at the start of the lesson? Is it during the session online? Is it when there is social interaction? What are the trigger points for me? What's actually increasing my levels of anxiety? What makes it worse? What helps? When is it not quite so bad? And what small steps can I take right now? What 3 things can I do to calm myself straight away? So my emergency 3 strategies in the first couple of minutes, and then listing the things that I can do every day to look after my well-being. And that might include scheduling in flow activities, fun activities, calm, chillax time. It may be engaging in visualization, mindfulness, etc. But it's what works for me, things I can do every day that I can factor into my well-being plan. People I can go to for help, to talk. Where are they? Who are they? How can I get hold of them? And also it's useful as part of the anxiety support plan to list any helpful websites, helplines or text lines that you might use, okay? And one source of support that's available 24/7 is really, really useful, because particularly when young people enter their teenage years, you may never know at what time of the day or night you might need some support. So very important to highlight that and have it written down as part of the plan. So as I said earlier, building our own wellbeing toolbox, our anxiety management plans, really important that we understand and have access to a range of different tools and strategies. Again, all of these are included in the Toolbox of Wellbeing publication for Hinton House, which I know many people have now found extremely useful. And I've mentioned many of them already in terms of grounding, mindfulness, cognitive restructuring, or challenging our negative automatic thinking. But also things like the calm down jar, worry time, and journaling ideas, activity scheduling, so making sure that we really timetable those fun activities into our days. When we are learning online, this is more important than ever. Visualization, fitness challenge, etc. So just some ideas, and I'd strongly recommend that you actually make reference to the publication for this. What is really, really important here is that it has to be what works for us as individuals. And one of the key mantras that I always maintain, both personally and professionally, is that if it doesn't nourish you and yours, then just don't do it. If you don't feel nourished, then don't do it. So very, very important. If it doesn't work for you, just don't do it, or do it differently or tweak it, whatever, but just don't do it unless it nurtures you. I am a great believer in journaling and the nourishing that we can achieve by engaging in daily journaling. It provides a structure and ritual that I've mentioned already that can help us reflect at the end of the day on 3 good things: what went well, strategies that helped. It can also help us to plan effectively those 3 kind acts, to reflect on our anxiety management plan. What could I do differently tomorrow? Who could help me? And it can also give us the means by which to, end the day on a really good affirmation that we go to sleep on. This is a really good, useful structure to ensure that children's day, young people's days, end positively, and that the anxiety is actually managed far more effectively. So I just wanted to highlight this power of journaling and the need to nourish through making use of those daily rituals. And also, this point in the presentation, I just want to briefly flag up the real need to ensure this accessibility, particularly for those children with additional needs, and ensuring that the activities and routines online help to reduce their anxiety also. And there are some easy wins. I'm particularly thinking about the SCMH, social emotional mental health context, and those for children with more significant learning needs as well. They need to be reminded about how to learn, so a distraction-free context, sitting with their laptop, removing the mobile whilst they're engaging in their learning, which they would also do in the so-called real-life context. Providing a bullet points outline, very clear at the start, pre-teaching vocabulary, using visuals, reading aloud from your so-called PowerPoints or however you want to present, and also using the teaching assistant really wisely in breakout rooms to support those children who may need that additional time to process, to understand, to assimilate, to interact. The tasks need to be shorter, more concrete, more realistic, and more time-bound. And encouraging activities such as quizzing will give that kind of immediate feedback that children with additional needs very often need. And again, as I said earlier, those follow-up phone calls need to be given as needed. Did you get this? Did you understand it? Are you feeling okay about this? Would you like some more help? Do you want me to re-explain something? Do you want some more support with this? So ultimately, although we are online, although we are so-called virtual now to a great extent, it's really, really important that we do continue to focus on building and maintaining those positive, significant relationships with each other. We know that no significant learning takes place without a significant relationship. So I think the challenges to us as teachers, as parents, as practitioners, professionals working with children and young people, there are 3 C's here that I've identified. One of the key challenges is about keeping ourselves well, about managing our own stress around the ongoing pandemic, and factoring into our daily routines the need for self-care when we're having to probably do 3 jobs as opposed to the usual 1 job. I also think for teachers in particular, the challenges around being so available online can be very, very great and very, very stressful. And also some very unrealistic expectations in some contexts around the level of face-to-face contact. I know one very close colleague of mine who's been asked to present every single session all week as a live session. And this is just absolutely impossible. And I'm very glad she's going to get a half term next week. I think we need to think very clearly about what those challenges are and how we keep ourselves well and keep each other well. And that means actually being quite vocal about it, not just sitting back and letting things happen. The community, keeping others well, keeping each other safe, means that we've got to be vigilant and observant. And maintaining connections is really, really part of this, maintaining those positive, supportive relationships that help us to manage what is ongoing stress and anxiety for many. So keeping yourself well, engaging in appropriate self-care is really, really important. We know that you can only teach or parent care support effectively when you are self-regulated. So it's important to think about your own physical, intellectual, emotional and support needs. And I love this idea of nurturing your empathic brain in order to be able to find my calm so that I can share it with others, in order to be able to be effective in terms of supporting a child to regulate, co-regulating with them. I need to nurture my own empathic brain. So ensuring that my physical needs are met, intellectual needs, my support needs and my emotional needs. This is really, really vital for us as adults, particularly at this time going forwards. So at this point in the presentation, just think about how you do look after yourself. Spend some time with colleagues, if you can stop the presentation now, and think about what you do in order to ensure your physical, intellectual, emotional and support needs are met. Write them down. Make sure that you talk about them, you reflect on them. What's really working well? What's not working quite so well? What do you need more of in your daily routines at this time in order to ensure that your self-care routine is truly effective? And keeping each other well is clearly very, very important at a whole school level, virtual or not. We know that our schools are open. They've been open throughout the whole of this last year, the whole of this pandemic. And the work has been ongoing. And we've had a combination of teaching online for many and teaching with children of those key workers in school, etc. We know all of this, but keeping each other well throughout this whole of this last year has been an absolute essential, making sure that we feel safe together and we can support each other. I talked to people in the first pandemic who were finding it increasingly difficult to maintain a level of relational safety because people were getting more stressed. They were shorter tempered with each other, with their colleagues. And they needed almost to be given permission to stop, to slow down and to find their calm again together, and to have the space and time and feel safe enough to talk to each other and really share their concerns and worries and stresses in order to then get a level of self-efficacy, to feel in control again. So connections and ensuring a sense of hope together that is joined up, that we feel collectively, we know we will get through this ultimately, and we will find different ways of being and living that are effective, that allow us again to connect. So what can we do at the whole school level right now to reduce our anxieties and those of our children, young people, and ensure that as we make the transition back into school, we really do get it right in terms of well-being? We need to focus, as I said earlier, on what we can control. We need to focus on our strengths and what went well, rather than just really this sort of navel gazing on and over-pathologizing of things that have gone wrong. Clearly, there will be some of us who will need more support, additional support, and that is fine. But for the majority of our children, young people, I think we need to be very clear about this. They will need basic support to maintain a level of anxiety that is manageable, because we will not get rid of it all in one fell swoop. So we need to ensure that we retell those stories of our strengths. We have this sense of community together, we're in it together. And I think as well for staff, for those who are leading in schools, we don't need to necessarily have to buy an expensive psychological support. We can actually engage in group supervision with each other to support each other as we navigate our way through the remainder of this pandemic going forwards. And very often that can be a very simple self-care space for 20 minutes where we just sit collectively as a staff team, sharing our skills, strengths and ideas, all the positives, the things that really work for us and work for us together as a team in order to be able to keep going and keep strong. So just to recap, the primary focus, I think, now is around maintaining those positive, supportive relationships for the children with each other, with their peers, and for us as adults with our communities, with our school communities, with our peers as well. And I think for our children, very simple things around the thought for the day, the emotional check-in time, those additional text calls, emails, Zooms, sharing of ideas and strategies, those 3 kind acts, the gratitudes, the kindness moments, focusing on what went well, etc. each day. So the journaling and the routines and the rituals, all of this stuff will help us to maintain those positive, supportive relationships that in essence will reduce our levels of anxiety and make it more manageable. So subsequent to the lockdown 3 that we're currently in, it's really important, this notion that we keep in touch with the school community. We renew and review our wellbeing and mental health provision in the light of this lockdown. I think that all our children should undertake a wellbeing survey. They should be going back in, and we should be actually really flagging up what the issues are, where they are, who's got them, so that we can target really, really specifically on transition. And we plan for that welcoming transition. We communicate the strategy for coping with wellbeing and mental health issues to the whole school community. This might involve additional training for staff in emotional wellbeing and mental health implications and the consequences of lockdown. It may also just be about providing significant signposts to really appropriate online help for pupils and staff. But establishing that new normal, reinforcing this sense of connection, safety and nurture, and focusing on staff being and maintaining their well-being will, in my essence, be key, in my view. It will be absolutely key here. So we need to be sure that this emotional well-being framework is clearly adhered to and addressed as we go back. Of course, we know that there will be those children who are more at risk of emotionally based school avoidance now at this time going forwards. So very, very important. I just wanted to flag up this particular resource, and I have done a session on EBSA as part of this series of CPD Coffee Time. So please make reference to that. I'm not going to talk about it too much now. I just wanted to flag up the resource. And of course, also highlight that not only are there 2 sections of really useful resources for when you're working one-to-one or in smaller groups with children who have EBSA, but there are also some very, very comprehensive appendices, including a checklist to identify those most at risk, and also ideas around how you can make use of various therapeutic approaches to support children and young people. And of course, the Sunday evening and Monday morning plans, I think, are an absolute essential for parents and carers. And we do need, I think, going forwards to be very aware of what the warning signs are for our children who may have far higher levels of anxiety. They might find it difficult to get back into the routines. They may talk more negatively about school, be reduced in terms of engagement. Some of their behaviours will not be those that we have seen typically prior to the lockdown. So there may be more displays of anxiety, anger and stress. So at the top end of the continuum, these are the children that we need to flag up at the outset on transition back. So we know traditionally when these anxiety levels usually increase. Okay, so we're talking about transition between primary and secondary, if there's been a loss or bereavement, which of course for many of our children now there has been during this pandemic, if there's been a change in friendship groups or bullying or a prolonged absence. Well, looking at this list, clearly for many of our children at risk, they will have experienced probably 2 or 3 of these. And really, in essence, I suppose, all of those triggers can be associated with the pandemic. I don't need to elucidate further really here. I think we can predict that many more children, young people and their families are going to have some struggles with this particular issue in the future. And at the top end of the continuum, I do think we're going to see more separation anxiety, social anxiety, generalized anxiety, more anxieties around health and keeping well. And I've certainly had some chats with parents over the last couple of weeks around children feeling very frightened about catching COVID and giving it to their grandparents, etc. So very important that we really do have the time to reflect on this. And underpinning this time of reflection and thinking and trying to get the right kind of levels of support and intervention in place, I think it's an absolute essential that all of us, parents, carers, teachers, support staff, really do understand anxiety and provide the right kind of emotional support. at the outset, because we can see how this cycle develops, how those negative thoughts increase, and how the avoidance reduces the anxiety. Okay, but then of course that doesn't solve it, because we will have that immediate reduction in anxiety, but then there will be increased levels of school avoidance. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle that children will need real support and intervention at the outset to really get through this. And we know what helps in schools, that early identification, those positive relationships with peers, with the adults, having a designated area in which to retreat if they feel under threat, having an empathic adult who can really talk with them and process information in a way that Margot Sunderland so beautifully describes around holding my emotional pain, being with me on that journey of navigating my trauma. I think really, really important, that trusted adult, the lack of bullying, opportunities to engage in activities that are pleasurable, and really a well-organised and responsive SEN department. And very important that as staff, as practitioners, as professionals, we really do understand and are aware of these issues and how to deal with them. So the implication there is get that additional training in this particular area. And of course, ultimately, all of our children, those who are more at risk of emotionally based school avoidance and those who are less at risk, those who have more lower levels, I'd say, of anxiety or stress at this time, but all of us will benefit from understanding how to self-regulate. So I'm just flagging up some of the resources that I have drawn from in this presentation, all of which are published by Hinton. I cannot reinforce enough the need now to teach all of our children, young people, and dare I say it, our staff, teams, our parents, really good essential skills for managing and dealing with anxiety effectively. So the breathing, the mindfulness, the noticing, the grounding, activity scheduling, thought stopping, cognitive restructuring, etc. I won't go through them all. They're all available to some extent in the toolbox of wellbeing, but I think it is really, really important. Managing anxiety at this time and going forwards continues to be the essential. So a final note regarding screen time. Please remember, if anyone feels under pressure that their child is accessing so much in terms of online learning and they're beginning to see problems in terms of their behaviour, their concentration, their emotional well-being, I would say honestly, from a psychological perspective, please reduce the screen time. Talk to the professionals involved and ensure that what is right and bespoke for your child is something that you have got put in place. It really, really works for them. It can be very helpful. That screen time, if it's effectively managed, we can communicate and connect more effectively. We can learn effectively. We can feel more relaxed. We can feel an increase in positive mood because we're engaging with others and seeing others, etc. However, conversely, too much screen time can also reduce interaction, particularly if the way it's delivered is extremely formal. It reduces physical time when we're moving around, when we're keeping fit. It can impact on mood or behaviour, a level of concentration, and disturb our sleep. So very careful here to be really, really vigilant about how we ultimately manage it. So just to summarise, successful approaches to remote learning focus on the people rather than the technology. So let's keep on doing this if we want our children to learn effectively online. Safety and nurture has to come first before any notion of so-called academic catch up. And let's just really make the shift away from this narrative. All our children have not fallen behind. All our children are not anxious. And those that are will get the right kind of levels of support that they need. We can ensure that that happens. We need to ensure this sense of connection and safety, that we recognise anxiety, we make things accessible, and we continue to maintain those attuned relationships with one another so that we have a sense of community and connection. Developing those individualised anxiety support plans or wellbeing plans is clearly an essential for all our children, but I'd also say it's also an essential for us as the adults who love and nurture them. So all of us need to self-regulate. So let's develop our toolbox, our repertoire of skills, so that we can share them with our children and help them to continue to navigate their way through this pandemic. Looking after you, yourself first, is vital. Then you can co-regulate with the children that you support. You can only share your calm when you have found it first yourself. So please remember that. And I hope this session has been helpful. Thank you very, very much for listening. And I'll look forward to thinking about what my next topic will be. So if you have any ideas or you'd like me to present on a particular issue or topic, then do please get in touch at tinarae@hotmail.co.uk, and do follow me on Twitter. Thanks for listening.